Everyone thinks the hardest part was telling the world's most feared mafia boss he had two heirs. They were wrong. The real nightmare began when the woman who left him for dead walked back into our lives. 7 years ago, when Junhook was missing and bleeding in a ditch, Han Seo-yun didn't look for him. She robbed him blind and vanished. Now that he's a king, she's back with a vial of poison and a plan to erase my children. She thinks I'm just a soft assistant. She's about to find out that a mother protecting her dragons is the most dangerous thing on this planet. Tonight, the ex-lover learns one final lesson. You don't play with the dragon's queen. Before we see the moment Amara confronts the woman who left her man for dead, I have a quick question for the family. Tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Write your city and country below. I read every single comment and I love seeing how far this story travels across the globe. And if you want to see Seo-yun get exactly what she deserves, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this video. Your support keeps this story moving and helps us grow the Kong Empire. Are you ready? Let's begin. The air in the Kong estate didn't just feel cold. It felt lethal when the security gates opened, not for an enemy, but for the woman who once buried him alive. For 7 years, Amara had imagined this fortress would be her sanctuary, the one place where the shadows of the past couldn't reach her children. But as she watched the woman step out of that red Ferrari, Amara realized the gates weren't built to keep monsters out. They were built to keep the secrets in. Junhook stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, his face a mask of stone. But Amara saw the slight tighten of his jaw. She knew that look. It was the look of a man seeing the ghost of the woman who had left him to die in the rain 7 years ago. The transition from the small, salt-scented cottage on the coast to the oppressive, sterile grandeur of the Kong estate had happened too fast. For Amara, the move felt like stepping into a gilded cage where the bars were made of reinforced steel and high-definition surveillance cameras. But for her son, Noah, it was something much worse. To a 7-year-old with his father's eyes and an old soul's intuition, the estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress built on secrets he was already beginning to scent in the air. Amara stood in the center of the sprawling bedroom assigned to the twins, her hands trembling slightly as she unpacked a crate of their old toys. The contrast was jarring. The worn wooden blocks and frayed stuffed animals looked like relics from another life against the backdrop of Italian marble floors and silk-paneled walls. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seoul skyline glittered like a sea of fallen diamonds. But within these walls, the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic footfalls of security detail patrolling the hallways. I don't like the men with the earpieces, Mommy. Noah's voice was small but startlingly firm. He was sitting on the edge of a bed that was far too large for him, his sketchbook clutched against his chest like a shield. His twin sister, Nia, was already distracted, humming to herself as she explored the walk-in closet that was bigger than their entire old kitchen. But Noah hadn't moved. He hadn't even taken off his shoes. "They're here to keep us safe, Noah," Amara said, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. She crossed the room and knelt before him, searching his face. He looked so much like Junhook in this light. The same sharp brow, the same way of holding his mouth when he was thinking. "This is a big city. Your father, he has a lot of responsibilities. These men are just part of his job. They have guns under their jackets," Noah countered. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made Amara's breath hitch. "I saw one when we got out of the car, and the man downstairs. The one you told us is our dad. He smells like the men with the guns." Before Amara could find a way to soften the truth, the heavy oak door creaked open. Kong Junhook stood in the threshold, his silhouette casting a long, intimidating shadow across the plush carpet. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar and sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint edge of a tattoo crawling up his forearm, a dragon's tail lost in the cuff of his shirt. He looked less like a CEO and more like the predator Amara had glimpsed in the parking garage. "Is there a problem?" Junhook asked. His voice was deep, vibrating through the room with a natural authority that usually made grown men tremble. Amara stood up, smoothing her dress. "He's just adjusting, Junhook. It's a lot for them." Junhook walked into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't know how to be a father. He only knew how to be a leader. He stopped a few feet from Noah, looking down at the boy who carried his DNA but viewed him with the cold suspicion of an enemy. This house is the safest place in Korea, Junhook said. His tone softened but still carrying that edge of iron. No one can touch you here. Isn't that what you want? To be safe. Noah stood up from the bed. He was small, reaching only to Junhook's waist, but he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Safety isn't when people are scared of you, the boy said, his voice ringing out with a clarity that silenced the room. The men downstairs are scared of you. The lady who came in the red car is scared of you. Even mommy is scared sometimes. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Amara felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She saw Junhook's eyes flicker, a momentary lapse in his armor. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone who stood 3 feet tall. I am their commander, Junhook replied, his jaw tightening. Fear is a tool for protection. You're too young to understand the world outside these walls, Noah. It is a place of monsters. My job is to be the biggest monster so they don't come for you. Then I don't want to live here, Noah snapped. He reached into his sketchbook and ripped out a page. It was a drawing he had started in the car, a charcoal sketch of the estate, but he had drawn long, jagged shadows reaching out from the windows like claws. He crumpled the paper and dropped it at Junhook's handmade leather shoes. I'd rather be back in our house with the leaky roof. At least there, the only monsters were in my books. Here, they walk the hallways and call me young master. Noah pushed past Junhook, his small shoulder bumping the man's leg as he ran toward the balcony. Amara started to follow, but Junhook held up a hand, stopping her. His gaze remained fixed on the crumpled ball of paper on the floor. Let him go, Amara, Junhook whispered. He's a child, Junhook. You can't talk to him like he's one of your lieutenants, she hissed, her voice low so Nia wouldn't hear. He's sensitive. He sees things. He sees the blood on your hands even if you think you've washed it off. Junhook reached down and picked up the drawing. He smoothed it out against his palm, his eyes tracing the jagged, dark lines his son had drawn. A strange, twisted pride flickered in his expression, followed quickly by a shadow of profound regret. He has my talent, Junhook muttered to himself, but he has your heart. That's a dangerous combination in this house. Junhook walked out onto the balcony where Noah was standing, gripping the iron railing and staring out at the city. The wind whipped at the boy's hair. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the king and the heir, separated by 7 years of silence and a mountain of corpses. You think I like the men with the guns? Junhook asked suddenly. Noah didn't turn around. You pay them. You must like them. I pay them because I know what happens to people who don't have them, Junhook said, leaning against the railing. He looked out at the city, his eyes distant. When I was not much older than you, I watched people I loved taken away because I wasn't strong enough to stop it. I decided then that I would never be weak again. I built these walls not to hide, but to ensure that if the world ever came for what was mine again, they would find a fortress, not a home. Noah finally looked up at him. But mommy says homes are made of love, not stone. Junhook looked at Amara, who was standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the bedroom. A look of raw, unshielded longing crossed his face. Your mother is right, but in my world, love is a luxury that costs lives. I am trying to learn how to have both, Noah, but I need you to stay. I need you to show me how to make this a home. Noah looked back at the city, then down at Junhook's hand. He saw the scars on his knuckles, reminders of the accident, and the battles fought to regain his throne. If I stay, Noah said, his voice trembling just a little, do you promise that the monsters won't ever come inside? Junhook knelt down, bringing himself level with his son. He placed a heavy, warm hand on Noah's shoulder. It was the first time he had touched the boy since the reveal, and the weight of it seemed to anchor them both to the earth. The monsters are already here, Noah. I am one of them, but I promise you this. I will never let another monster hurt you or your sister, and I will never, ever let them hurt your mother again. Noah didn't hug him. He wasn't ready for that, but he didn't pull away. He looked at Junhook with a gaze that was far too wise for a child. I'll stay, but I'm going to keep drawing. And if I see a monster, I'm going to tell mommy. Junhook gave a grim, ghost of a smile. Fair enough. As Junhook stood up and walked back into the room, he caught Amara's eye. The tension between them was palpable. A mix of old desire and new, terrifying responsibility. He brushed past her, his voice a low rumble that only she could hear. He's going to be harder to break than Marcus ever was. He's a true Kong. He's not yours to break, Amara whispered back, her eyes flashing with fire. He's mine to raise. Junhook stopped and looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He is both, Amara. And the sooner you realize that the world knows he exists, the sooner you'll realize why these guards are necessary. He walked toward the door, but stopped when he saw Nia running toward him with a doll in her hand. Unlike her brother, Nia was enamored by the castle and the shiny things. She hugged Junhook's leg, and for a split second, the feared Mafia boss froze, his hands hovering in the air as if he were afraid he might break her. Slowly, awkwardly, he patted her head. Is the princess hungry? He asked, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. I want ice cream, Nia giggled. Then ice cream you shall have. Even if I have to buy the factory, Junhook replied. As he led Nia out of the room, Amara felt a cold chill settle over her. The domesticity of the moment felt like a lie. She looked back at the balcony where Noah was still standing, his sketchbook open once more. He was drawing again, but this time he wasn't drawing shadows. He was drawing the man with the dragon tattoo, but he was drawing him with a sword in his hand, standing in front of a door. Amara walked to the window and looked down at the driveway. The red Ferrari was gone, but the ghost of Han Seo-yun lingered in the air like a poisonous fog. She knew that the challenge Noah had issued was just the beginning. The fortress was already under siege, and the enemy wasn't just at the gates. She was already weaving her way into the cracks of their new life. Amara reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She saw a missed call from an unknown number and a single text message that made her blood run cold. Asterisk, a dragon only keeps what he can protect. How long do you think you can keep his heirs alive in a house full of traitors? Asterisk. She looked at Noah, then at the empty hallway where Junhook had disappeared with Nia. The stability she had fought 7 years for was gone. She was no longer a ghost in a coastal village. She was the queen in a den of wolves, and as the moon rose over Seoul, Amara Cole realized that to save her children, she might have to become exactly what Noah feared. She wouldn't just live among the monsters. She would have to rule them. Amara closed the balcony doors and locked them, the click of the bolt sounding like a finality. She sat on the bed beside Noah and took his hand. We're going to be okay, Noah. I know, Mommy, Noah said without looking up from his page. Because you're the only one who isn't scared of the dragon. And that makes you the strongest monster of all. Amara pulled him close, her heart aching. The innocence was fading, replaced by the harsh reality of their new lineage. The Kong blood was waking up in her son, and as she looked at his latest drawing, a dragon coiled around a small, fragile heart, she knew that the game hadn't just begun. It had already claimed its first victim, the piece she had tried so hard to give them. Now there was only the fortress, and the long, dark night ahead. The rain in Seoul 7 years ago didn't fall. It judged. It was a torrential, suffocating downpour that turned the neon lights of the Gangnam district into bleeding smears of red and blue against the asphalt. That was the night the world ended for Kong Junhook, though he wouldn't truly understand the depth of the wreckage until 120 days later. To understand the man who now sat upon a throne of glass and iron, one had to understand the man who had been left to rot in the mud of a construction site on the outskirts of the city, his life force leaking into the thirsty earth while the woman he loved was busy calculating the value of his disappearance. The memory always began with the sound of screeching tires and the sickening crunch of metal, a sound that stayed with him even through the 4 months of darkness that followed. It hadn't been an accident. Junhook knew that even as his car flipped, the world spinning in a nauseating kaleidoscope of shattered glass and sparks, he had been targeted. He was a rising star then, a brilliant financial mind with a streak of ruthlessness that threatened the established order of the underworld. He had money, he had a vision, and he had Han Seo-yun. Or so he thought. For 4 months, Kong Junhook was a ghost. To the medical staff at the charity hospital where he had been dropped off by a nameless passerby, he was patient 404. A man with a fractured skull, shattered ribs, and a face so swollen and bruised he was unrecognizable. He lay in a coma, a vegetable in a ward that smelled of antiseptic and despair, while his brain fought a silent war to reconnect with reality. He had no identification. His wallet and watch had been stripped by scavengers before the ambulance arrived. For those 120 days, he didn't exist. He was a body taking up space, a flicker of electricity in a silent heart. In his dreams, he saw Amara. He saw that one night of stolen heat, the softness of her skin, and the way she had looked at him with a purity that terrified him. But more often, he saw Seo Yun. He saw the woman he had promised a kingdom to, the woman who held the keys to his digital vaults and the deed to their future. In the darkness of his coma, her face was his anchor. He fought to wake up for her. He clawed his way back from the brink of brain death because he imagined her at home, weeping, searching every hospital, calling every contact, refusing to believe he was gone. He imagined her as the one person who wouldn't give up on a man who had nothing left but his name. When Junhook finally opened his eyes, the light was a physical assault. It took weeks for his vision to clear, weeks for his tongue to remember how to shape words. His first word wasn't a prayer. It was her name. Seo Yun, he had rasped, his throat feeling as though it were lined with broken glass. The nurses had looked at him with pity, a look he would grow to loathe. They told him he was lucky to be alive. They told him he had been a John Doe for a third of a year. The day he finally discharged himself, limping, his ribs still aching with every breath, his face scarred with a permanent jagged line that missed his eye by an inch, he didn't call a car. He didn't have a phone. He walked. He walked through the streets of Seoul like a specter, his clothes rags, his spirit held together by the singular, burning need to reach the penthouse. He imagined the moment the elevator doors would open. He imagined the look of shock and joy on Seo Yun's face. He imagined her falling into his arms, telling him that she had kept everything ready, that they could rebuild, that they were safe. But the city had moved on. The season had changed from a biting winter to a humid, oppressive spring. When he finally reached the luxury high-rise that held his life's work, the doorman, a man he had tipped $1,000 every Christmas, didn't even look him in the eye. "I'm sorry, sir," the doorman said, blocking the path with a gloved hand. "Deliveries are in the rear." "It's me, Choi," Junhook whispered, his voice still ragged. "It's Kong Junhook. Open the door." The doorman froze, squinting at the scarred, gaunt man before him. Recognition flickered, followed instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. "Mr. Kong? But you're dead." There was a service. Everyone said, "I'm not dead," Junhook snapped, the old fire flickering in his veins. "Where is Seo Yun? Where is my wife?" The doorman looked away, his face turning pale. "Sir, Miss Han. She sold the unit. 3 months ago. She said the memories were too painful. She moved out the week after the police stopped looking for you." Junhook felt a coldness settle in his chest that no sun could warm. He pushed past the man, ignoring the protests, and rode the elevator to the top floor. He had a key, a spare hidden in a magnetic box beneath the hall console. His hands shook as he pulled it out. The metal was cold. The lock turned with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent hallway. The penthouse didn't smell like her. It didn't smell like the expensive lilies she loved or the sandalwood he preferred. It smelled of nothing. It was a hollowed-out shell. The Italian leather sofas were gone. The artwork, pieces he had spent millions to curate, had been stripped from the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the paint like scars. Even the light fixtures had been removed. She hadn't just moved. She had harvested the apartment. He walked into the master bedroom. The massive bed where they had whispered about their future was gone. In its place was a single crumpled piece of paper on the floor, a receipt from a high-end auction house. He picked it up. It listed his entire life. His watches, his car, the jewelry he had bought her for their anniversary. The date on the receipt was less than 30 days after his accident. She hadn't waited for the body to grow cold. She had started liquidating him while he was still on a ventilator. The betrayal was a physical weight, pressing the air from his lungs. He slumped against the bare wall, his fingers digging into the drywall. He went to the kitchen, or what was left of it. He checked the floorboard beneath the pantry where he kept his emergency black accounts, cold storage drives with millions in untraceable cryptocurrency. It was his failsafe, the money that would ensure they could disappear if things ever went wrong. The floorboard was loose. He pried it up with bleeding fingernails. The space was empty. There was nothing left. Han Seo-yun had taken the money he had earned in blood and used it to fund her escape. She hadn't just left him. She had erased him. She had taken his past, his present, and his future, leaving him a broken man in an empty room. He learned later that she had told the world he was a degenerate gambler who had fled his debts, tarnishing his reputation so thoroughly that no one would ever look for him. She had sold his home to his biggest rival, the very man who had likely ordered the hit on his car. That was the moment the Kong Joon-hook of the past died. The man who believed in loyalty, the man who believed that love could survive a storm, was buried in that empty penthouse. He had stood at the window, looking out at the city he had once thought he conquered. He had nothing. No money, no home, no name. He was a ghost in a city of millions. But as he stared at his reflection in the glass, the jagged scar across his cheek, the hollowed-out eyes of a man who had seen the bottom of the abyss, a new emotion took root. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was a cold, crystalline resolve. He would not die. He would not disappear. He would claw his way back, not for the money, and not for the status, but for the reckoning. He would build an empire so vast that she would have nowhere to hide. He would become the most feared man in Korea so that when he finally found her, the sound of his name would be the last thing she ever heard before her world collapsed. For the next 6 years, he had lived in the shadows of the underworld. He had started as a debt collector for small-time thugs, using his brilliance to reorganize their chaotic books. He had moved up through the ranks of the syndicates, his lack of fear making him a legend. He took the jobs no one else wanted. He survived 3 more assassination attempts, each one only making him harder, colder. He reinvested every penny, played the markets like a grandmaster, and slowly, piece by piece, he bought back his life. He didn't just rebuild his wealth, he tripled it. He took over the Kong Group, a dying conglomerate, and turned it into a weapon of economic war. He became the CEO who never smiled, the man who lived in a glass skyscraper but slept with a gun under his pillow. He had everything now. The cars, the planes, the power. He had the executive floor that felt like a temple to his own survival. And yet, in the quiet moments, he still felt the phantom pain of those 4 months. He still felt the coldness of the empty penthouse. He had convinced himself that women were a liability, that love was a weakness used by predators like Seo Yun to find the soft spots in a man's armor. That was why Amara's return had been such a cataclysm. Sitting in his office now, 7 years after the accident, Joon-hook leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes fixed on the security monitors showing the hallway of his estate. He watched Amara walk past a camera, her expression guarded, her hand resting protectively on Noah's shoulder. He thought about the night he had woken up in that hospital. He thought about the 120 days of silence. And then he thought about the 2,555 days Amara had spent raising his children alone, without his money, without his protection, while he was becoming a monster. She had been the only one who didn't rob him, because she hadn't known he was a king. She had loved the man who had nothing, while Seo Yun had only loved the throne. The door to his office opened, and a shadow fell across the mahogany desk. It was his lead security detail. "Sir, we've tracked the origin of the message sent to Miss Cole." Joon-hook didn't look up. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "Was it her?" "Yes, sir. Han Seo Yun. She's staying at the Grand Hyatt. She's been in contact with several of the board members who are unhappy with the recent changes in leadership." Joon-hook's hand tightened around a crystal glass of whiskey, the knuckles turning white. The scars on his hands stood out in stark relief. The ghost hadn't just returned to haunt him. She had returned to feed. She saw the massive wedding as a threat to the claim she still believed she had. She saw Amara as a nuisance and the twins as leverage. "She thinks I'm the same man she robbed 7 years ago," Joon-hook whispered, finally looking up. His eyes were void of any warmth, reflecting only the cold, hard light of the computer screens. "She thinks she can walk back into my life and find the same weaknesses she exploited before." He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the sprawling grounds of his fortress. He could see the silhouettes of his guards patrolling the perimeter. 7 years ago, he had been a victim of his own trust. He had been left for dead in a ditch while the woman he loved sold his life for cents on the dollar. "Call Marcus," Joon-hook commanded. "Sir? Your brother-in-law is still in the holding cell." "I don't care. Bring him to the interrogation room. If Seo Yun is back, it means Marcus isn't the only traitor in the family. I want to know exactly how much she knows about my children." As the guard bowed and left, Junhook turned his gaze back to the monitor showing the twins' bedroom. He saw Nia asleep, her small hand clutching a stuffed toy. He saw Noah sitting by the window, his sketchbook open, his eyes wary. The price of a life was something Junhook knew well. He had paid for his in blood and 4 months of darkness. He had spent 7 years turning himself into a god of the underworld so that no one could ever take anything from him again. Seo-yun had made a mistake. She had forgotten that a man who has lost everything and survived has nothing left to fear. And she had forgotten that the dragon didn't just protect his gold. He burned anyone who tried to steal it. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had kept in his private directory for years. A number belonging to a private investigator he had used to track Seo-yun's movements across Europe and the Americas, waiting for the right moment to strike. "It's time," Junhook said when the line connected. "The vulture has landed. Prepare the dossiers. I want every account she's opened, every man she's slept with for money, and every lie she's told since she left me in that ditch. By the time I'm done with her, she'll wish I had died in that car crash." He hung up and looked at the diamond ring sitting in a velvet box on his desk, the ring intended for Amara. The wedding was no longer just a celebration of their union. It was a battlefield. Seo-yun had sold his home, his car, and his dignity 7 years ago, but she would never touch his heirs. And she would never, ever take the woman who had given him the one thing money couldn't buy, a reason to stay human. The air in the office grew still. The memory of the rain, the smell of the hospital, and the hollowness of the empty penthouse faded, replaced by the sharp, burning focus of a predator who had finally found his prey. The price of a life was high, and Junhook was finally ready to collect the debt. He walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy and purposeful on the marble. He didn't head for the interrogation room. He headed for the bedroom where Amara was. He needed to see her. He needed to remind himself that the nightmare of 7 years ago was over, even as a new war began. Because in the end, Seo-yun had been wrong about one thing. She thought she had taken everything from him, but she had left him the one thing that would eventually destroy her, his rage. And as the dragon's queen slept, unaware of the storm gathering at the gates, the dragon stood guard, his eyes fixed on the darkness, waiting for the first sign of movement from the woman who had once been his world, and was now his target. The game was no longer about power. It was about survival. And this time, Junhook wouldn't be the one fighting for air. The air in the subterranean levels of the Kong estate did not circulate. It stagnated, thick with the smell of damp concrete and the sterile, metallic tang of high-security ionized air. Amara Cole descended the stairs, her heels echoing like a rhythmic countdown against the stone. In the world above, she was the dragon's queen, draped in silk and surrounded by the scent of expensive lilies. Down here, she was just a sister going to face the man who had sold her soul to the devil while telling her he was saving her life. 2 guards stood outside the heavy steel door, their faces as expressionless as the stone walls they protected. They didn't ask for her identification. They didn't challenge her. They simply bowed, their movements synchronized and silent, and pulled the heavy bolts back. The sound of the iron grinding against iron was a jarring reminder of where she was, the belly of the beast, where the laws of the sunlit world ceased to exist. Marcus Cole sat on a narrow cot in the center of the room. The space was clean, almost clinical, but it was a cage nonetheless. He looked smaller than she remembered, stripped of the expensive Italian suits and the swagger of a Mafia lieutenant. He wore a simple gray tracksuit, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. When the door creaked open, he didn't look up immediately. He remained staring at his hands, which were clasped tightly between his knees. "I brought you something," Amara said, her voice sounding hollow in the small space. She set a small paper bag on the bolted-down table. "The pastries from that bakery on the corner of our old street. The ones with the bitter orange marmalade you used to like." Marcus finally looked up. A ghost of a smile flitted across his face, but it was quickly replaced by a shadow of profound regret. "You always were too good for this family, Amara. Even when I was throwing you to the wolves, you were looking for the orange marmalade." Amara didn't sit. She stood by the door, her hands folded over her stomach, feeling the weight of the diamond collar around her neck. It felt heavier down here, a reminder of the price she had paid for the safety of her children. "Why did you do it, Marcus?" 7 years. 7 years of looking me in the eye while I struggled to buy milk for Noah and Nia. 7 years of telling me Junhook thought we were a burden, while you were telling him I had run away with someone else. Marcus stood up, pacing the 3 steps allowed by the dimensions of his cell. You don't understand the pressure, Amara. You were always protected by your innocence. I was the one in the trenches. I saw what happened to the families of men who rose too fast. When Junhook had that accident, I thought it was over. I thought the rival families would tear us apart. If I had brought you into that chaos, you would have been dead within a week. I lied to keep you hidden. I lied to keep you alive. You lied to keep yourself powerful, Amara countered, her voice rising with a cold, sharp edge. You used my children as leverage. You kept the heir of the Kong Empire in a shack by the sea so you could play king while Junhook was rebuilding his throne. You weren't protecting me, Marcus. You were hedging your bets. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes narrowing. Maybe, in the beginning, but then it became a habit. A lie is like a drug, Amara. The more you tell it, the more you need it to survive. But you didn't come down here to talk about the past. You came because you saw her. You saw the red Ferrari. Amara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Han Seo-yun. Marcus laughed. A harsh, jagged sound that grated against the silence. The ghost has returned to claim the grave. You think I'm the villain of the story? You think Junhook is the monster you should fear? You have no idea what's walking through those gates. Seo-yun isn't just an ex-lover, Amara. She's a virus. She's the only person who ever truly got under Junhook's skin. And she's the only one who knows exactly where the cracks are in his armor. He hates her, Amara said, though she felt a tremor of uncertainty. He told me what she did, how she robbed him while he was in a coma, how she sold his home. Hate and love are 2 sides of the same coin in this world, Marcus said, stepping closer to the bars. His voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Junhook is obsessed with the betrayal, and obsession is just another form of intimacy. Seo-yun didn't come back for the money, Amara. She has plenty of that. She came back because she realizes that Junhook is more powerful than he's ever been, and she wants that power back, and she will use those children of yours to get it. Amara's hand flew to her throat. She doesn't know about them, not the details. She knows enough, Marcus warned. She's been watching from the shadows for months. Who do you think told her Junhook was announcing a wedding? She has eyes everywhere, Amara. Even in this house. She's more dangerous than any hitman Junhook has ever faced. A hitman wants your life. Seo-yun wants your soul. She wants to be the one holding the leash of the dragon again. He reached through the bars, his fingers grazing Amara's sleeve. She didn't pull away, though every instinct told her to run. Listen to me, little sister. For all my sins, I still share your blood. Junhook is playing a game of chess, but Seo-yun is playing a game of psychological warfare. She knows that Junhook's greatest weakness isn't his money or his territory. It's his guilt. His guilt over those 4 months he was missing. His guilt over the life he couldn't give you. She will weaponize that guilt until he doesn't know who the enemy is anymore. I can handle her, Amara said, her chin lifting. I'm the mother of his children. I'm the one who stayed when the world was on fire. You're a lamb in a den of wolves, Marcus sighed, pulling his hand back. You think being right matters here? Doesn't. Seo-yun will drug him. She will gaslight him. She will make him believe that you are the one who is the interloper. She's already started, hasn't she? The messages, the unknown numbers. Amara didn't answer. The silence was her admission. She's a master of the slow poison, Marcus continued. By the time Junhook realizes she's destroyed his trust in you, it will be too late. She'll have the board members on her side. She'll have the legal claims to his early assets, and she'll have you looking like a gold digger who hid his heirs for a payday. Amara looked at her brother, seeing the fear in his eyes. A genuine, raw terror that he had never shown even when Junhook's men were dragging him to the cell. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because if she wins, I'm dead, Marcus admitted, his voice cracking. Junhook might keep me in a cell out of some twisted sense of loyalty to you, but Seo-yun? She knows I know where her bodies are buried. She'll have me silenced the moment she regains her seat at the table, and then she'll come for Noah and Nia, not to hurt them, not physically, but to mold them, to turn them into little versions of herself, to use them as the ultimate shields against Junhook's rage. The thought of Seo Yun's cold, manicured hands on Noah's sketchbook or Nia's dolls made Amara feel a physical sickness. She turned toward the door, her resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. "Amara!" Marcus called out as she reached for the handle. "Don't trust the guards. Don't trust the board members. And for God's sake, watch Junhook's glass. She's used that trick before. She doesn't need to kill him to win. She just needs him to lose his mind." Amara paused, her hand on the cold steel. "If you're lying to me again, Marcus, if this is just another play to get yourself out of this cell, then let me rot here," Marcus said, his voice solemn. "I've earned this cage, but you don't belong in one. If you want to save your family, you have to stop playing by the rules of a secretary. You have to start thinking like a predator, because Seo Yun is already halfway through your front door." Amara stepped out of the cell, the heavy door thudding shut behind her. The sound of the bolts sliding into place felt final, a period at the end of her childhood. She walked back up the stairs, leaving the stagnant air of the basement behind, but the weight of Marcus's words followed her like a shadow. When she reached the main floor, the estate was bathed in the golden light of sunset, but it no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a stage. She saw Junhook standing in the library, his back to her, staring at a portrait on the wall. He looked lonely, a titan burdened by the very crown he had fought so hard to reclaim. She wanted to run to him to tell him everything Marcus had said. But as she watched him, she noticed a small, white envelope resting on the side table next to his favorite chair. It was sealed with a wax stamp, a crest she didn't recognize, but the scent of lilies was unmistakable. Seo Yun was already inside. Amara didn't go to the library. Instead, she turned toward the kitchen. She found the head of the domestic staff, an older woman who had been with the Kong family for decades. "From now on," Amara said, her voice dropping into a register of command that startled even herself, "no one serves the chairman anything to drink or eat unless I have seen it first. Not the coffee, not the wine, not the water. If a guest brings a gift, it is to be brought directly to my office, unopened." The woman blinked, her eyes widening. "But, Miss Cole, the chairman's preferences are handled by—" "I am the mother of the Kong heirs," Amara interrupted, stepping into the woman's space. Her shadow stretched long across the kitchen floor. "And I am the future wife of your CEO. My word is the final word in this house. Do I make myself clear?" The woman bowed deeply, her voice trembling. "Perfectly clear, madam." Amara walked out of the kitchen, her heart racing. She felt the eyes of the security cameras on her. But for the first time, she didn't feel like a victim of surveillance. She felt like she was the one watching. She retreated to her private study, the small room Junhook had given her to manage the household affairs. She sat at the mahogany desk and opened her laptop. She didn't look at the wedding guest list or the catering menus. Instead, she opened a secure file that Junhook had unknowingly left accessible on the family network. The personnel files of the board of directors. Marcus was right about one thing. She had been playing the role of a secretary. She had been waiting for Junhook to protect her. But the dragon was currently blinded by his own past, haunted by the ghost of a woman who had already breached the perimeter. If Junhook couldn't see the poison in the cup, then she would be the one to dash it from his hand. If he couldn't see the traitors in the boardroom, she would be the one to expose them. She looked at the diamond collar in the mirror. It was no longer a symbol of her belonging to Junhook. It was a badge of office. She picked up her phone and dialed the unknown number that had messaged her earlier. She waited through the rings, her breathing steady, her eyes fixed on the door. When the line connected, there was a silence on the other end, followed by a soft, melodic laugh that chilled Amara to the bone. "I was wondering how long it would take for the assistant to find her voice," Han So-yun purred. "I'm not the assistant," Amara said, her voice like a blade being unsheathed. "And I'm not the girl you think I am. You left Junhook when he was broken because you were too weak to handle the fall. But I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who built a life out of the silence you left behind." "How touching," Seo Yun replied, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "But let's be honest, Amara. You're just a placeholder. A warm bed and a convenient story for the press. Junhook doesn't love you. He loves the idea of a family he lost. Once I remind him of what we really were, the fire, the ambition, the blood, he'll realize that a commoner like you can never truly breathe the air at the top of this mountain." The air at the top is thin, Amara countered. Maybe that's why you're so desperate to claw your way back. But here's a warning, Seo-yun. You might know Junhook's weaknesses, but you don't know mine. And unlike you, I have something worth dying for. If you so much as breathe in the direction of my children, I won't wait for Junhook to handle it. I will end you myself. There was a pause on the other end. The first crack in Seo-yun's composure. We'll see about that at the gala, darling. Let's see who Junhook chooses when the past and the present are standing in the same room. I've already sent him a little reminder of what he's missing. I hope you like the scent of lilies. They're so popular at funerals. The line went dead. Amara slowly lowered the phone, her knuckles white. She looked at the door of her study, imagining the woman on the other end of the line. Elegant, ruthless, and utterly convinced of her victory. Seo-yun thought this was a battle for a man's heart. She thought it was a competition of beauty and history. She didn't realize that she wasn't fighting a lover. She was fighting a mother whose children were finally safe, and who would rather turn the entire empire to ash than let them be used as pawns again. Amara stood up and walked to the window. Below, in the courtyard, she saw the guards moving in their silent patrols. They were Junhook's men, but she realized now that she needed her own eyes. She picked up the internal intercom. Send the head of security to my office. Now. As she waited, she opened the paper bag of pastries Marcus had left untouched. She took one out, the one with the bitter orange marmalade. She took a bite, the sharp, acidic sweetness hitting her tongue. It was a taste of home, of a life that no longer existed. She chewed slowly, watching the sun disappear behind the Seoul skyline. The cell of judgment wasn't just in the basement anymore. It was everywhere. And as the darkness took hold of the city, the Dragon's Queen prepared for her first night of war. She wouldn't just watch the cup. She would find the person holding the vial. And when she did, she would make sure that Han Seo-yun realized that some ghosts should stay buried. The game had officially moved from the boardroom to the heart of the home. And in this house, there was only room for one queen. Amara straightened her dress, wiped a stray crumb from the mahogany, and waited for the knock at the door. The girl who ran from the Mafia 7 years ago was gone. In her place was a woman who was beginning to realize that the only way to beat a monster was to understand exactly how it thought. And as the head of security entered the room, bowing low, Amara Cole didn't smile. She just began to issue her first orders. The fortress was hers to defend, and she intended to win. The grand ballroom of the Shilasol was a cathedral of excess, draped in white orchids and illuminated by crystal chandeliers that dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears. This was the moment the Kong group was meant to announce its new era, the union of the dragon and his queen. But as Amara Cole stood at the top of the marble staircase, her hand resting on the gold leaf railing, she didn't feel like a bride. She felt like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield where the mines were made of gossip and the bullets were dipped in champagne. She was a vision in midnight blue silk, the fabric clinging to her curves like a second skin, while the diamond collar Junhook had fastened around her neck caught the light with every breath she took. Beside her, Kong Junhook looked every bit the apex predator. His black tuxedo was tailored to perfection, his expression a mask of cold, aristocratic indifference. He looked like a man who owned the world, yet as his fingers tightened around Amara's waist, she felt the subtle tension in his frame. He wasn't just presenting her to the world. He was bracing for the collision. The elite of Seoul's underworld and corporate upper crust watched them descend, a sea of silk and hungry eyes. For weeks, the tabloids had whispered about the mystery assistant, who had captured the heart of the most feared man in Korea. They looked for flaws, for the stutter in her step that would betray her common blood. But Amara moved with a grace that silenced them, her chin tilted at an angle that demanded respect. She wasn't just the mother of his heirs tonight. She was the shield standing between Junhook and the ghosts of his past. Stay close, Junhook whispered, his voice a low vibration that only she could hear. The vultures are circling. Let them circle, Amara replied, her gaze fixed forward. I've spent 7 years surviving in the dark. I'm not afraid of a few light bulbs. The gala was a choreographed dance of fake smiles and lethal subtext. Every board member who bowed to them held a hidden agenda. Every socialite who complimented Amara's dress was measuring the depth of her influence. But the atmosphere shifted the moment the heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell over the room, a silence so sudden and heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the lungs of the elite. Han Seo-yun didn't just enter the room. She staged an invasion. She was dressed in a gown of blood-red lace that left little to the imagination, a bold, defiant contrast to Amara's regal blue. She moved with the practiced ease of a woman who had walked these halls when they were her own. Her eyes locked onto Jun-hook with a terrifying familiarity. Behind her, a small entourage of photographers followed, their flashes turning the entrance into a strobe light frenzy. Jun-hook, Seo-yun purred, cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk. She ignored Amara entirely, stepping directly into Jun-hook's personal space. The scent of lilies followed her, heavy and cloying, a physical reminder of the flowers she had sent to the estate. It's been far too long. I heard you were throwing a little party to celebrate your new arrangement. Jun-hook's face turned to stone. The hand on Amara's waist went rigid. You weren't invited, Seo-yun. This is a private event for the Kong group. Seo-yun let out a soft, melodic laugh that carried across the ballroom. Private? Darling, I still hold the legacy shares of the founding family. I don't need an invitation to my own history. Besides, she turned her gaze toward Amara for the first time, her eyes like chips of ice. I wanted to see the girl who's been keeping my seat warm. She's charming. Very girl next door. I suppose after everything you went through, you needed something safe. Something simple. The insult was calculated to perfection. In the eyes of the high society guests, Amara was being framed as a rebound, a temporary comfort for a man who had suffered a traumatic loss. Seo-yun was playing the role of the grand tragic love, the one who had been there for the real Jun-hook, while Amara was merely the nanny who had stayed. Safety isn't a weakness, Seo-yun, Amara said, her voice clear and carrying across the circle of eavesdroppers. She stepped forward, not away, closing the gap until she was eye to eye with the woman who had robbed her man of his life. And simple is a word usually used by people who don't understand the complexity of loyalty. Jun-hook doesn't need a ghost from his past to remind him of who he was. He has a family now that reminds him of who he is. Seo-yun's smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. She turned back to Jun-hook, reaching out a manicured hand to adjust his lapel, a gesture of intimate ownership. Do you remember the night we signed the deeds to the penthouse, Hook? The rain was just like this. You told me that no matter what happened, I was the only one who truly understood the monster inside you. Can this girl say the same? Does she know the weight of the blood on those hands? Or does she just see the diamonds you bought her to keep her quiet? The room held its breath. This was the play, to paint Amara as a gold digger and herself as the soulmate. Seo-yun was weaponizing the accident, using the trauma of those 4 missing months to bridge the gap between her and the man she had betrayed. Jun-hook caught Seo-yun's wrist before she could touch his skin. His grip was slow, deliberate, and clearly painful. The woman standing beside me didn't need a deed to stay by my side. She didn't sell my home while I was bleeding in a ditch. You talk about understanding the monster, Seo-yun? The monster you knew is dead. The man standing here today was raised from that ditch by the strength of the woman you're trying to insult. He turned to the crowd, his voice booming with a terrifying authority. Tonight was meant to be an engagement gala, but let it be a declaration. Amara Cole is not a replacement. She is the foundation, and anyone who mistakes her grace for weakness, or her silence for ignorance, will find out exactly what happens when the dragon protects his own. Seo-yun wrenched her arm away, her face twisting into a mask of beautiful rage. She leaned in close to Amara, her voice a venomous whisper that only they could hear. Enjoy the throne while it lasts, little secretary. But remember this, he's a creature of habit. And habits always return to what they know. I was his first choice. You're just his last resort. Let's see how long he stays loyal. When I start revealing the secrets your brother Marcus told me while you were playing house in your little village. Amara felt the blood drain from her face at the mention of Marcus. Seo-yun saw the flicker of fear and grinned, tapping Amara's cheek with a single finger. The gala is just the beginning, darling. By the end of the night, he'll be wondering why he ever thought a ghost could raise his heirs. Seo-yun swept past them, moving toward the bar with the confidence of a woman who had just planted a bomb and was waiting for the timer to hit 0. Amara stood frozen, the noise of the ballroom rushing back in like a tidal wave. She felt Jun-hook's hand on her back, guiding her toward the balcony for air. "Don't listen to her," June-hook muttered as they stepped into the cool night air. "She's desperate. She's trying to get into your head. She already knows about Marcus, June-hook," Amara said, her voice trembling. "She knows he was talking to her. If she tells the board that Marcus was collaborating with her to hide the heirs, they'll use it to claim I was part of the conspiracy to keep you away from your children for a payday." June-hook pulled her into his arms, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't care what the board thinks. I know the truth. But the world doesn't," Amara cried, looking up at him with eyes full of tears. "She's trying to make me look like her. A woman who uses you for what you have. If she succeeds, Nia and Noah will be seen as pawns in a power struggle, not your children." June-hook looked out over the city, his jaw set in a line of iron. He realized that Seo-yun wasn't just attacking his relationship. She was attacking the legitimacy of his lineage. She was trying to poison the well before the children could even take their place in it. "Then we changed the game," June-hook said, his voice dropping into that dark, lethal register. "If she wants to play the temporary replacement card, we'll show her what a permanent queen looks like. Tonight, we don't just announce an engagement. We announce the formal recognition of the heirs. We put their names on the legal documents in front of everyone. We make them untouchable. But they're just children, June-hook. If we do that tonight, there's no going back. Their faces will be everywhere. They are already everywhere, Amara. Seo-yun has already seen them. The only way to protect them now is to give them the power they were born with." Amara looked back through the glass doors at Seo-yun, who was currently surrounded by 3 of the most influential board members, laughing and sipping wine as if she had already won. Amara thought of Noah's drawings, the shadows with claws. She realized that the only way to kill the shadows was to step into the light, no matter how blinding it was. "Do it," Amara said, wiping her eyes and straightening her silk skirts. "Let's show her that the assistant is finished. The queen is taking her throne." As they re-entered the ballroom, the music changed to a slow, haunting waltz. June-hook led Amara to the center of the floor, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. He didn't wait for the MC. He took the microphone from the podium himself. "I have one final announcement for the evening," June-hook said, his eyes fixed directly on Seo-yun. "Many of you have wondered about the woman at my side. You have heard rumors of a past and whispers of a temporary arrangement. Let me be clear. Amara Cole is the mother of my children, Noah and Nia Kong. As of this moment, they are the sole recognized heirs to the Kong Group and the Kong estate. Any move against them is a move against me. And any attempt to suggest otherwise," he paused, his gaze lingering on Seo-yun's pale face, "will be treated as an act of war." The gasp that went through the room was audible. In one sentence, June-hook had ended the speculation and placed a target on his own back to shield his family. Seo-yun's glass shattered on the floor, the red wine looking like a fresh wound against the white marble. Amara stood tall, her hand clasped firmly in June-hook's. She looked at Seo-yun and, for the first time that night, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile of survival. The temporary replacement had just become the most powerful woman in the room. And as the photographers rushed forward, Amara knew that the piece of her old life was gone forever. But as she looked at June-hook's fierce, protective gaze, she realized that for the first time in 7 years, she wasn't running. She was reigning. The gala wasn't an ending. It was the coronation of a new kind of monster. And as the dragon's queen turned to lead her husband back into the fray, she knew that Seo-yun's vial of poison was still out there. But tonight, the queen had the crown, and she wasn't letting go. Now write the next chapter using the outline below. The minimum word count for this chapter is 1,000 words. Maximum 3,000. Keep the same tone, pacing, and emotional style as the previous section. Write in a smooth, flowing story format with no section headings. Chapter outline. The adrenaline of the public declaration still hummed through the ballroom, but the air had shifted from celebratory to predatory. While the elite of Seoul buzzed about the sudden crowning of the Kong heirs, Amara felt a prickle of unease at the base of her neck. The victory felt too easy, the silence from Han Seo-yun's corner too heavy. June-hook was surrounded by a wall of board members and international investors, his face a mask of triumph. But Amara remained at the periphery, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. She remembered Marcus's warning in the damp darkness of the cell. Watch his glass. Seo Yun was no longer fuming. She had retreated to a velvet lounge area, draped across a chaise like a queen in exile, surrounded by a small group of sycophants. She looked calm, too calm for a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. Every few minutes, her gaze flickered toward Junhook, not with longing, but with the cold, patient calculation of a hunter waiting for a trap to spring. A waiter moved through the crowd, carrying a silver tray of vintage Krug. Amara watched him. She watched every hand that reached for a flute, every movement of the staff. She saw Seo Yun signal to one of her own assistants, a young man with a nondescript face who slipped toward the service entrance. Amara began to move, threading through the silk and tuxedo-clad bodies, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached Junhook just as the chairman of a major shipping conglomerate raised his glass for a toast. To the future of the Kong Group, the chairman boomed. And to the heirs who will carry the dragon's fire into the next generation. Junhook reached for a glass from a passing tray, the same waiter Seo Yun's assistant had spoken to moments prior. Amara's breath hitched. She was 5 feet away, blocked by a wall of laughing socialites. She saw the light catch the liquid in Junhook's glass. It looked identical to the others, but as he lifted it to his lips, she saw a faint, oily shimmer on the surface that shouldn't have been there. Junhook, wait! She called out, but her voice was drowned out by the cheers of 100 guests. He drank. He didn't drain the glass, but he took a long, deep swallow before setting it back on the tray. Amara finally reached his side, her hand gripping his forearm. Her touch was cold, her eyes searching his face for any sign of distress. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Junhook looked down at her, a confident smirk touching his lips. "I'm fine, Amara. The announcement is done. The board is falling into line. Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "That glass," she said, looking back at the waiter, who was already disappearing into the kitchen. "Seo Yun's man. He was near the service station." Junhook laughed, a deep, rich sound that usually brought her comfort, but tonight it sounded slightly off. Too loud, too loose. "You're being paranoid. Seo Yun is defeated. Look at her. She's barely even looking our way." But Amara saw. Seo Yun was looking now. She was leaning back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her painted lips. 5 minutes passed. 10. The gala moved into its second hour, the music swelling into a faster, more rhythmic tempo. Junhook began to change. It started with the sweat, a fine sheen breaking out across his forehead despite the air-conditioned chill of the ballroom. Then came the eyes. The sharp, piercing focus that defined Kong Junhook began to soften, his pupils dilating until his dark eyes looked like bottomless pits of ink. He gripped the edge of a high-top table, his knuckles turning white. "It's hot in here," he muttered, his voice dropping into a rasp. "Amara, why is the music so loud?" "Junhook, look at me," she commanded, stepping in front of him to block the view of the guests. He looked at her, but it was as if he were looking through her. His breathing was heavy, ragged, and his hand on her waist tightened with a strength that was almost painful. "I feel strange," he whispered, "like the room is tilting." This wasn't a poison designed to kill. It was something more insidious. It was a specialized neurotoxin, the kind Marcus had whispered about, designed to break down a man's inhibitions, to make him suggestible, disoriented, and vulnerable. Seo Yun didn't want him dead. She wanted him ruined. She wanted him to make a scene, to look like a drugged-out liability in front of the very board members he had just intimidated. "We have to leave. Now," Amara said, signaling to the head of security, Kim, who was stationed 10 feet away. But before Kim could move, Seo Yun was there. She appeared like a shadow out of the light, her hand sliding onto Junhook's other arm. "Junhook, darling, you don't look well. Perhaps you should come sit with me in the private lounge. The press is starting to stare." "Get away from him," Amara hissed, her voice a low growl of a mother lioness. "Oh, Amara, don't be dramatic," Seo Yun replied, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "He's clearly having a reaction to the stress. Or perhaps it's that commoner's wine you're so fond of. Junhook, come with me. I have the antidote. I have some water in the quiet room." Junhook blinked, his head rolling slightly. He looked at Seo Yun, and for a terrifying second, his hand drifted toward her. The drug was working. His brain was reaching for the familiar, for the woman who had occupied his mind for years before the accident. "Seo-yun?" he murmured, his voice thick. "I'm here, Hook. I've always been here." She lied, her voice a soothing, poisonous honey. Amara didn't hesitate. She knew that if Junhook left this floor with Seo-yun, the Dragon's Queen, would be a joke by morning, and the heirs would be seen as the offspring of an unstable addict. She slapped Junhook hard. The sound cracked through the immediate circle of guests, drawing gasps of shock. The physical shock seemed to snap a thread in Junhook's clouded mind. His eyes cleared for a fractional second, focusing on Amara's fierce, tear-streaked face. "Kim, take the chairman to the car. Use the freight elevator. No cameras," Amara commanded. The security team moved with clinical precision. They swarmed Junhook, hoisting him up under the guise of helping a drunken man. So-yun tried to follow, her face contorted with rage. "You can't take him. He needs medical attention that only my doctors." Amara stepped into Seo-yun's path, her small frame looking immovable. "Your doctors are the reason he's in this state. If you follow us, I will have Kim break your legs in front of every camera in this room, and I'll tell the police you were the one who supplied the dose." "You wouldn't dare," Seo-yun spat. "You have no proof." "I have the glass," Amara lied, her eyes boring into Seo-yun's. "And I have the waiter. Choose your next move carefully, Seo-yun, because the assistant just disappeared, and the woman who is about to protect her family is someone you aren't prepared to face." So-yun hesitated, the realization dawning on her that the safe, simple girl was gone. Amara didn't wait for a response. She turned and ran after the security team, her silk heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the marble. They reached the black SUV in the underground garage just as Junhook's legs gave out. They slid him into the back seat, his head lolling against the leather. Amara scrambled in beside him, pulling his head into her lap. "Drive to the estate. Call the private clinic and tell them we need a full toxicology screen and a sedative flush." As the car roared out of the garage, Junhook began to thrash, his hand clawing at his collar. "Amara, everything is dark. I can't see the children." "I'm here, Junhook. I've got you," she whispered, stroking his hair, her tears falling onto his burning skin. "The kids are safe. I'm not letting her touch you again." He looked up at her, his eyes unfocused, his voice a broken whimper. She said I was a monster. Am I a monster, Amara? You're a father," she sobbed, holding him tighter as the city lights blurred past the window. "And you're mine, and I'm going to burn her world down for what she did to you tonight." In the dim light of the moving car, Amara Cole felt the last of her hesitation die. She had tried to play by the rules of society, but Seo-yun had brought the war into her man's very blood. As Junhook's breathing finally began to even out under the weight of his body's struggle, Amara looked out at the Seoul skyline. The toast was poisoned, and the gala was a ruin. But as she felt the weight of the dragon's head on her lap, she knew one thing for certain. The Game of Thrones was over. The game of survival had begun, and she was going to make sure Han Seo-yun didn't live to see the sunrise. The foyer of the Kong estate was a cavern of shifting shadows and moonlight, a stage set for a reckoning 7 years in the making. Amara sat in the high-backed velvet chair, the cold weight of the beretta pressed against her thigh, hidden by the midnight blue silk of her gown. She watched the heavy oak doors groan open. Han Seo-yun stepped inside, her silhouette framed by the silver glow of the moon. She didn't look like a woman who had just been humiliated at a gala. She looked like a victor returning to reclaim a kingdom she had never truly abdicated. Seo-yun's heels clicked against the marble with a sickening familiarity. She didn't see Amara at first, her eyes fixed on the grand staircase that led to the medical wing. She moved with a predatory grace, her red lace dress trailing behind her like a smear of fresh blood on the white stone. "You're late, Seo-yun," Amara said, her voice cutting through the silence like a guillotine. Seo-yun froze. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as she saw Amara sitting in the darkness. A sharp, melodic laugh escaped her lips, echoing off the high ceilings. "Still playing the loyal guard dog, I see. I told you, darling, the assistant doesn't belong in this house. You should have taken the children and run while you still had the chance." "The children are sleeping," Amara said, rising slowly. She didn't pull the gun yet, but she kept her hand resting on the fold of her skirt. And Junhook is waking up, but he isn't asking for you. He's dreaming of the man he's going to become when he finally wipes the stain of your name from his life. Is he? Seo-yun purred, stepping closer. Because the neurotoxin I gave him doesn't just disorient. It unearths. It brings back the memories a man tries to bury. Right now, Junhook doesn't know what year it is. He doesn't know about a secret assistant or twins in a coastal village. He only knows the woman who was by his side when he built this empire. He knows me. Seo-yun didn't wait for a rebuttal. She swept past Amara, heading for the stairs. Amara followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. They reached the medical wing, a sterile corridor of glass and blue light. Outside Junhook's room, the guards stood aside. Not because they were traitors, but because Kim had given the order to let the trap play out. Inside, the room was dim. Junhook was sitting up in bed, his chest bare, wires trailing from his skin to the monitors. He looked haunted. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. The drug was still clawing at his mind, stripping away the present and leaving him vulnerable to the ghosts of the past. Junhook, Seo-yun whispered, her voice shifting into a soft, melodic coo. She rushed to the bedside, pushing aside the medical tray. She took his hand, her fingers tracing the scars on his knuckles. I'm here. I finally found you. Those doctors, they tried to keep me away. They told me you were dead, just like they did 7 years ago. Junhook groaned, his head lolling back against the pillows. He looked at her, his vision clearly blurred. Seo-yun? Is it raining? Yes, Hook. It's raining, she lied, leaning in close until her lips were inches from his ear. But you're safe now. I've settled the accounts. I've cleared the path. We can go back to the penthouse. We can leave all this madness behind. You don't need this fortress. You don't need these people who only want you for your shadow. Amara stood in the doorway, her blood turning to ice. She watched as Junhook's hand tentatively reached up to touch Seo-yun's face. The drug was winning. He was reaching for the woman he had loved before the world broke him. The woman who represented a time when he wasn't a monster. She's lying, Junhook, Amara said, her voice trembling with raw emotion. Look at me. Look at the diamond you put around my neck. Remember the drawing Noah made? Remember the N and N? Junhook flinched at the mention of the children, his brow furrowing in a mask of agony. Noah, Nia, don't listen to her, Hook, Seo-yun hissed, her grip on his arm tightening. She's a hallucination, a side effect of the trauma. She's the one who kept your children from you. She's the one who let you rot in that hospital while she waited for you to become rich enough to claim. I'm the one who stayed. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Seo-yun was reversing the truth, painting herself as the victim and Amara as the opportunist. For a man in a drug-induced delirium, the lie was simpler than the truth. Junhook's eyes drifted back to Seo-yun, a look of desperate, broken hope flickering in his gaze. You stayed, he rasped. Always, Seo-yun whispered, leaning in to kiss him. Enough, Amara screamed. She lunged forward, grabbing Seo-yun by the hair and wrenching her away from the bed. The physical confrontation was sudden and violent. Seo-yun shrieked, her manicured nails clawing at Amara's face, leaving red welts across her cheek. They tumbled to the floor in a heap of silk and lace, the sounds of their breathing ragged and desperate. Seo-yun was fueled by greed and the fear of her debts, but Amara was fueled by something far more primal. She pinned Seo-yun against the cold tile, her forearm pressed against the other woman's throat. You robbed him, Amara yelled, her face inches from Seo-yun's. You sold his home. You let him wake up in a charity ward with no name. I am the one who sat in a shack by the ocean and told his children their father was a hero. I am the one who looked at his face in the news and cried because I thought he would hate me. You don't get to touch him. You don't even get to breathe his air. Seo-yun reached into the folds of her red dress, pulling out a small, jagged piece of glass she had hidden, a shard from the champagne flute she had broken at the gala. She slashed at Amara's arm, the glass cutting deep into her bicep. Amara cried out, the warmth of her own blood soaking into her blue silk sleeve, but she didn't let go. Amara? The voice was weak, but it was clear. The sound of her name, shouted in pain, had done what the doctors couldn't. It had pierced through the fog of the neurotoxin. Junhook was struggling out of the bed, the heart monitor flatlining into a steady, high-pitched scream as the sensors tore away from his skin. He collapsed to his knees on the floor beside them, his hand shaking as he reached out. He didn't reach for Seo Yun. He reached for Amara's bleeding arm. "Amara? You're bleeding," he whispered, his eyes finally focusing, the dark ink of his pupils receding to reveal the cold, hard steel beneath. He looked at Seo Yun, who was still pinned beneath Amara, the glass shard in her hand glinting in the blue light. The realization of the betrayal, the past and the present colliding in one moment of crystalline clarity, shattered the last of the drug's hold on his mind. Junhook's hand shot out, his fingers closing around Seo Yun's throat with the force of a hydraulic press. He lifted her off the ground as he stood, his bare chest heaving, the dragon tattoo on his arm appearing to writhe in the dim light. "You," Junhook growled, the sound vibrating from deep in his chest. "You came into my house. You touched my woman. You threatened my heirs. Hook, please." Seo Yun gasped, her feet dangling above the floor, her face turning a terrifying shade of purple. "I did it for us. There is no us," Junhook said, his voice a death knell. "There is only the debt you owe me for the last 7 years. And tonight, I'm collecting the interest." He flung her across the room. She hit the glass medicine cabinet with a sickening crash, a rain of vials and shattered mirrors burying her in the debris. She lay there, sobbing, her red dress torn, the illusion of the elegant socialite finally destroyed. Junhook didn't look at her again. He turned to Amara, who was still on the floor, clutching her bleeding arm. He knelt beside her, his movements no longer jerky, but filled with a terrifying, focused intensity. He tore a strip of linen from the bedsheet and began to wrap her wound, his hands remarkably steady. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his forehead leaning against hers. "I'm so sorry I let her in. She's not alone, Junhook," Amara gasped, the pain in her arm flaring. "Julian Thorne is in the city. They're coming for the twins. They have a mole in the security team." Junhook went still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He stood up, looking toward the door where Kim was now standing, his head bowed in shame. "Kim," Junhook said, his voice dangerously quiet, "find the mole. I want him in the basement within the hour. And call the perimeter. If so much as a shadow moves toward the nursery, kill it." He looked back at Seo Yun, who was trying to crawl toward the door. "As for her," Junhook said, a cruel cold smile touching his lips, "don't kill her yet. Amara found her debts. We're going to hand her over to the Swiss creditors. Let's see how much her legacy is worth when they're done with her." Amara stood up, leaning on Junhook for support. She looked at the woman who had nearly destroyed their lives. Seo Yun looked up at them, her eyes full of a defeated, hollowed-out hatred. "You think you won?" Seo Yun spat, a trail of blood running from her lip. "Julian won't stop. He knows what those children are worth. You've just turned your home into a graveyard." "Then I'll be the undertaker," Junhook replied. He picked Amara up in his arms, carrying her out of the room. He didn't look back. As they walked through the hallways toward the nursery, the estate was no longer a silent fortress. The sirens were beginning to wail in the distance, and the sound of weapons being readied echoed through the marble halls. The dragon was awake, and the queen was by his side, bleeding but unbroken. The high-stakes play had failed, and the physical confrontation was over. But as Junhook pushed open the door to the twins' room and saw Noah standing guard over a sleeping Nia with a plastic sword in his hand, Amara realized that the war had only just moved into its final, most lethal phase. "Daddy?" Noah asked, his eyes wide. "I'm here, son," Junhook said, setting Amara down. He knelt and took the plastic sword from the boy, replacing it with the heavy, cold weight of his own hand. "And I'm never leaving again." The dragon's weakness had been his past, but as he looked at his family, he realized it had become his greatest strength. And heaven help anyone who tried to take it from him now. The digital heart of the Kong estate was a room bathed in the sterile, sapphire glow of 100 monitors. A space where privacy went to die and the truth was stripped bare by algorithms. Amara stood in the center of the command hub, the hum of the cooling fans sounding like a low, mechanical growl. Junhook was still in the medical wing, his body fighting off the remnants of the neurotoxin. But Amara couldn't afford to wait for him to wake. The dragon was incapacitated, and the vultures were already picking at the edges of his empire. If she was going to protect her children, she had to stop playing defense. She had to become the hunter. "Show me everything on Han Seo-yun," Amara commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. The lead technician hesitated, his fingers hovering over the glass keyboard. "Miss Cole, the chairman's private dossiers are encrypted with biometric. I am the mother of his heirs," Amara interrupted, stepping into the light of the main screen. The diamond collar around her neck shimmered, reflecting the scrolling lines of code like a badge of absolute authority. "And currently, I am the only person standing between this family and total ruin. Bypass the encryption. Now." The technician swallowed hard and obeyed. Seconds later, the screen exploded into a mosaic of documents, bank statements, and grainy surveillance footage. Amara leaned in, her eyes scanning the data with the clinical precision she had learned during her years as a top-tier assistant. She wasn't looking for the Seo-yun the world saw, the elegant, wealthy socialite. She was looking for the rot beneath the silk. It didn't take long to find the first crack. Han Seo-yun's lifestyle in Europe over the last 7 years had been a masterpiece of deception. While she had portrayed herself as a savvy investor of the inheritance she stole from Junhook, the records told a darker story. High-stakes baccarat in Monaco, failed real estate ventures in Dubai, and a series of predatory loans from a Swiss firm known for its ties to the Russian underworld. Seo-yun wasn't just back for Junhook. She was running from a debt that was fast approaching 9 figures. "She's broke," Amara whispered, a cold realization dawning on her. She didn't come back to reclaim her throne. She came back because the guillotine is over her head. But there was more. Amara pulled up the flight manifests from the night of Junhook's accident 7 years ago. She cross-referenced them with the personal accounts Seo-yun had emptied. One name appeared repeatedly in the hidden metadata of the wire transfers. Julian Thorne. Amara pulled his file. Thorne was the new boy, the man Seo-yun had flaunted in the months following Junhook's supposedly final accident. He was the golden-haired scion of a rival shipping dynasty, the man who had supposedly offered her the stability Junhook lost. But as Amara dug deeper into the encrypted communications, she found the true nature of their alliance. Seo-yun hadn't just left Junhook for Thorne. She had used Thorne to facilitate the hit on Junhook's car. The surveillance network flickered as Amara accessed a long-buried police report from a precinct in the outskirts of Seoul. A witness had seen a black sedan matching Thorne's private security detail at the site of the crash. Seo-yun had traded Junhook's life for a seat at Thorne's table, only to discover that Thorne was as much of a predator as she was. He had drained her accounts, used the stolen Kong money to settle his own family's debts, and discarded her in a villa in Nice 3 years ago. "She's a cornered animal," Amara realized, her fingers flying across the touchscreen. She lost the money she stole. She lost the man she betrayed Junhook for. And now she's trying to sell the Kong heirs to the highest bidder to pay off her Russian creditors. Amara felt a wave of nausea, followed by a searing, white-hot rage. Seo-yun wasn't just a ghost. She was a parasite that had finished eating its first host and had returned to finish the job. Amara pulled the current GPS data for Seo-yun's burner phone, the one she had used to send the threatening messages. The signal was pinging from a private club in the city center, a place where board members met in the shadows. "Kim," Amara said, her voice dropping into a register that made the security team stand at attention. "I want the financial records of Julian Thorne's current holdings. And I want the contact information for the Swiss firm Seo-yun owes money to. If she wants to play a game of leverage, we're going to give her a masterclass." For the next few hours, Amara worked with a ruthlessness she didn't know she possessed. She moved money through shell companies, buying up Seo-yun's debt under the Kong Group's subsidiary. She didn't just want to stop Seo-yun. She wanted to own her. She drafted a series of legal injunctions that would freeze Seo-yun's remaining assets in Korea within the hour. But the final move was the most dangerous. Amara accessed the private servers of the Grand Hyatt where Seo-yun was staying. She found the footage of Seo-yun meeting with Julian Thorne, who was secretly in Seoul. Only 2 nights ago, the new boy was still in the picture, and they were planning a second strike. They weren't just after the money anymore. They were planning to kidnap the twins to force Junhook into a full corporate surrender. Amara looked at the screen, her heart freezing in her chest. She saw a map of the Kong estate, highlighted with the very surveillance blind spots she was currently standing in. Seo Yun had a mole inside the security team. "Everyone out," Amara commanded, turning to the technicians. "Except Kim. Now." When the room was empty, Amara turned to the head of security. "There's a traitor in your ranks, Kim. Someone gave Seo Yun the codes to the medical wing. She's not just coming for the throne. She's coming for Junhook tonight, while he's still sedated." "I will lock down the estate, madam," Kim said, his hand moving to his holster. "No," Amara said, her eyes gleaming with a lethal intelligence. "If you lock it down, she'll wait. I don't want her to wait. I want her to think she's winning. I want her to come through that door thinking the dragon is sleeping and the assistant is crying. We're going to let her in, Kim. But when she arrives, she isn't going to find a victim." Amara walked over to the main console and hit a final sequence of keys. She sent a single message to Seo Yun's phone. "He's waking up. He's asking for you. The guards are changing shift at 2 a.m. The side gate is open." It was a trap. The Queen's gambit. Amara was sacrificing the illusion of her own safety to draw the enemy into the light. She knew that by inviting Seo Yun in, she was risking everything. But as she looked at the monitor showing her children's nursery, where Noah was still awake, drawing in his sketchbook, she knew she couldn't live in fear anymore. "Kim, prepare the interrogation room, and get a doctor on standby. Not for Junhook. For our guest." Amara left the command hub and walked through the silent, dark hallways of the estate. She didn't go to the children. She went to Junhook's room. She sat by his bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. He looked so vulnerable, his hand twitching in his sleep as if he were still fighting the ghosts of that ditch 7 years ago. "I've got you, Junhook," she whispered, leaning over to kiss his forehead. "You fought for us in the dark. Now it's my turn to fight for you in the light." She reached into the bedside drawer and pulled out the small, sleek Beretta Junhook kept there. She had never fired a gun in her life, but as she felt the cold weight of the steel in her hand, she didn't feel afraid. She felt a strange, chilling clarity. She walked back to the main foyer, the midnight blue silk of her dress rustling against the marble. She sat in the high-backed chair at the bottom of the grand staircase, the gun hidden in the folds of her skirt. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2 a.m. The silence of the house was absolute, until the faint, electronic click of the side gate echoed through the monitors in her mind. The vulture had arrived, and the Queen was waiting. Amara straightened her diamond collar, tilted her chin up, and watched the heavy oak doors. She had found the debts, she had found the new boy, and she had found her own strength. Tonight, the Dragon's Queen wasn't just protecting the Horde, she was ending the war. As the door slowly creaked open, revealing the silhouette of Han Seo Yun in the moonlight, Amara didn't flinch. She just smiled. "You're late, Seo Yun," Amara said, her voice cutting through the darkness like a guillotine. "I was starting to think you didn't have the courage to finish what you started." The game was no longer about corporate shares or secret heirs. It was about the price of a betrayal. And as Seo Yun stepped into the foyer, realizing she had been led into a trap, Amara Cole rose from her chair, the light of the moon catching the cold steel in her hand. The gambit was complete, and the checkmate was coming. The transition from the high-stakes adrenaline of the foyer to the clinical, subterranean silence of the interrogation wing felt like descending into a tomb. The air here was different, colder, stripped of the expensive lilies and the scent of rain. Amara walked down the concrete corridor, her midnight blue silk dress whispering against the floor, a sharp contrast to the brutalist architecture of Junhook's private prison. Behind her, the heavy thud of the security doors closing sounded like a gavel hitting a block. This was the final room of the fortress, the place where secrets were stripped bare and mercy was a currency that few could afford. Inside the small, reinforced room, Marcus Cole sat under the harsh glare of a single overhead light. He looked a decade older than he had just 24 hours ago. His eyes were sunken, his skin a sallow gray, and the bravado that had once defined him as a rising star in the underworld had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man. When the door opened and Amara stepped into the light, he didn't look up. He didn't have the strength to face the sister he had betrayed, the sister who now held his life in the palm of her hand. "It's over, Marcus," Amara said, her voice echoing with a chilling, newfound authority. She didn't sit. She stood at the edge of the shadows, her hand resting on the back of the bolted-down chair. Seo Yun is in a holding cell at the airport. She's being handed over to the Swiss creditors. Julian Thorne's assets have been flagged for international money laundering. The mole in the security team has been found. The board has been purged. Marcus let out a ragged, dry laugh. You did all that? My little sister, the assistant? You've become quite the monster, Amara. Junhook must be so proud. I didn't do it for Junhook, Amara replied, her eyes narrowing. And I didn't do it to become a monster. I did it because you left me no choice. You sold our blood, Marcus. You used my children, your own niece and nephew, as a bargaining chip to keep yourself relevant in a world that was already moving past you. You watched me struggle for 7 years, watched me cry over the lack of a father for my children, while you knew exactly where he was. You knew he was alive and you knew he was looking for us. You didn't protect me. You stole 7 years of my life. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. I thought I was doing the right thing. If I had told him about the kids when he was first waking up, when he was still unstable and vengeful, you would have been caught in the crossfire. I wanted to wait until the dust settled, until I could ensure you were safe. You waited until you could ensure you were safe, Amara corrected him, her voice dropping into a register of cold, hard iron. You waited until you could use the information to buy your way back into his good graces. You gambled with my children's lives, Marcus. And tonight you lost. The door behind her opened, and Junhook stepped into the room. He was still pale, the bandage on his arm a stark reminder of the physical cost of the night, but the fire in his eyes was back, a dark, consuming blaze. He stood behind Amara, his presence a heavy, suffocating weight. He didn't speak, he didn't have to. He was the executioner waiting for the Queen's command. He's yours, Amara, Junhook said, his voice a low rumble. The evidence of his treason is absolute. I can have him delivered to the docks by sunrise. He'll be on a freighter to a territory where my name doesn't reach, and he'll never be heard from again. Or, I can handle it here, permanently. Marcus flinched, his body trembling. He looked at Amara, a desperate, silent plea in his eyes. He was her only brother. He was the man who had taught her how to ride a bike, the man who had promised to protect her when their parents died. The bond of blood was a powerful thing, a tether that had kept Amara from walking away for 7 years. But as she looked at him, she didn't see her brother. She saw the man who had almost let Han Seo-yun poison her husband. She saw the man who had put a target on Noah and Nia's backs. For a long moment, the silence in the room was absolute. Amara felt the darkness of the fortress closing in around her. The weight of the crown she hadn't asked for but was now forced to wear. She thought of Noah's drawings, the shadows with claws. She realized that if she let Marcus stay, if she chose forgiveness over safety, she would be inviting those shadows back into her children's nursery. Forgiveness is a luxury for people who don't have something to lose, Amara whispered, her voice trembling just once before hardening into a finality. I spent 7 years being a sister. Tonight, I am a mother. She stepped closer to the table, leaning down until she was inches from Marcus's face. You're not going to die, Marcus. That would be too easy. You'd become a martyr in my mind. A ghost I'd have to apologize to. No, you're going to live. But you're going to live as if you were never born. She turned to Junhook, her eyes clear and dry. Send him to the freighter. Strip him of the Cole name. Strip him of every cent he earned from your empire. If he ever sets foot on Korean soil again, if he ever tries to contact me or my children, you have my permission to do whatever is necessary. But for tonight, I want him gone. I want the stain of his betrayal washed out of this house. Marcus collapsed forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. He began to sob, the sound of a man who had realized that his sister was finally gone, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. Junhook nodded to the guards. They stepped forward, hauling Marcus to his feet and dragging him toward the door. As they passed Amara, Marcus tried to reach out, his fingers brushing the silk of her sleeve. She didn't flinch. She didn't look back. She stood like a statue of ice until the doors closed and the sound of his sobbing faded into the distance. When they were alone, Junhook walked around the table, stopping behind her chair. He leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. You were magnificent, he whispered. You were born for this, Amara. You just didn't know it. I was born to protect my children, she replied, turning her head to meet his gaze. Her eyes were no longer those of the soft assistant he had met in the elevator. They were the eyes of a woman who had walked through the fire and come out forged in iron. If that means becoming a monster's queen, then so be it. But don't think for a second that I've forgotten who put us in this position. Marcus betrayed us, but you built the world that made him think he had to. Junhook reached out, his fingers tracing the line of the diamond collar. It was no longer a gift or a claim. It was a pact. I'll spend the rest of my life making you forget, he promised, his voice thick with a raw, desperate sincerity. He leaned in, and for the first time in 7 years he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, drunken kiss of their youth. It was a kiss of fire and iron. It was a claim laid in the heart of a fortress. A union of two people who had both been broken by the world and had decided to build a new one out of the wreckage. Amara didn't pull away. She felt the darkness of his world closing in around her, the cold marble and the silent guards and the heavy secrets. And for the first time, she didn't fight it. She leaned into it, a silent vow forming in her mind. The dragon had his queen, and the queen was going to make sure that anyone who threatened her children, including the dragon himself, would regret the day they ever saw her face. They walked out of the interrogation wing together, ascending from the depths of the earth back into the moonlit grandeur of the estate. As they reached the main foyer, the staff was already busy cleaning the glass from the medical wing, erasing the evidence of the night's violence. The world was returning to its polished, perfect facade, but the foundation had changed. Amara stopped at the bottom of the grand staircase. She looked up toward the nursery, where her children were safe, sleeping in a world she had just secured with a betrayal of her own blood. She felt the weight of the night on her shoulders, but she also felt a strange, chilling peace. The game was far from over. Julian Thorne was still out there, and the board members would always be hungry, but for tonight the fortress held. Go to them, Junhook said, his hand lingering on her waist. I have to handle the final transfers for Marcus. I'll be up soon. Amara nodded and climbed the stairs. She entered the nursery, the air smelling of lavender and baby powder. She sat on the edge of Noah's bed, watching his peaceful, rhythmic breathing. He looked so much like his father, yet he had her heart. She leaned over and kissed his forehead, then did the same for Nia. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights of Seoul were bright, a sprawling sea of life that knew nothing of the war fought in this house tonight. She saw a black car leaving the estate, heading toward the harbor. She watched it until its tail lights disappeared into the shadows. The fire of the night had burned away her past, and the forgiveness she had once hoped for had been traded for the safety of her heirs. Amara Cole was no longer the girl who ran. She was the woman who ruled, and as the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, the queen closed her eyes and finally slept, knowing that the dragon was standing guard at the door. The walls were high, the guards were many, and the game was only just beginning. The morning of the wedding did not break with the celebratory warmth of a new beginning. Instead, it arrived with a heavy, bruised sky that hung over the Kong estate like a shroud. Inside the fortress, the atmosphere was a frantic, disciplined chaos. Makeup artists, world-renowned florists, and stone-faced security details moved through the halls with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. This was the wedding of the century, a multi-million-dollar production designed to cement the legend of the dragon and his queen. But for Amara Cole, standing before a three-way mirror in her private suite, the white silk and Belgian lace felt less like a bridal gown and more like a suit of ceremonial armor. Every stitch of the dress was perfection, a masterpiece of hand-sewn pearls and intricate embroidery that trailed behind her like a river of ivory. The diamond collar Junhook had given her was now accompanied by a tiara that had once belonged to a deposed empress, a clear signal to the world that the assistant had been replaced by a sovereign. Her reflection was breathtaking, the sharp lines of her jaw and the cold clarity in her eyes speaking of a woman who had survived the fire and learned to love the heat. Yet, as she adjusted the veil, a phantom chill settled in the marrow of her bones. A soft knock at the door broke her concentration. It was one of the junior maids, a girl whose eyes were downcast, her hands trembling as she held a silver tray. On it sat a single square envelope made of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It bore no return address, no name, only a wax seal in the shape of a weeping willow. a symbol Amara didn't recognize. "This was left at the security gate, madam," the girl whispered. "They said it was urgent. A gift for the bride's eyes only." Amara took the envelope, the weight of it feeling strangely heavy. She signaled for the maid to leave. Alone in the room, surrounded by the scent of 10,000 white roses, Amara broke the seal. Her breath hitched as she pulled out a single high-resolution photograph. It wasn't a card or a message of congratulations. It was a crime scene photo, dated 7 years ago. It showed the wreckage of Junhook's car, crumpled like a discarded soda can at the bottom of the rain-slicked ravine. The image was vivid, the red of the taillights bleeding into the muddy water. But as Amara looked closer, her heart stopped. The photo had been taken from a high angle, looking down into the ditch. In the corner of the frame, partially obscured by the foliage, was the rear bumper of a second vehicle, a sleek, dark government-issue sedan. Stuck to the back of the photo was a small, handwritten note on vellum. The ink was fresh, the handwriting elegant and precise. Asterisk, the dragon thinks he survived a tragedy. He survived a trial. Look at the license plate in the reflection of the glass. The hand that pushed him is the same hand that will toast to your health today. Asterisk. Amara's hands began to shake, the photograph fluttering to the floor. She lunged for it, her silk gloves frantic as she pulled a magnifying glass from her vanity drawer. She centered it on the jagged shard of a side-view mirror caught in the grass. There, reflected in the silvered glass with terrifying clarity, was the license plate of the car that had forced Junhook off the road. It wasn't Julian Thorne's car. It wasn't a rival syndicate's vehicle. The plate belonged to the private fleet of the Kong Group's board of trustees. Specifically, the lead car assigned to the man who was currently standing in the ballroom downstairs, preparing to walk Amara down the aisle in place of her late father. The accident hadn't been a betrayal by a greedy lover or a hit by a jealous rival. It had been an internal execution, a corporate assassination ordered by the very inner circle that now pretended to be Junhook's most loyal advisors. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Han Seoyun hadn't ordered the hit. She had simply been the scavenger who arrived to pick the bones clean after the board had tried to kill the king. "Amara? It's time." Junhook's voice boomed from the other side of the door, deep and commanding, yet tinged with a rare, genuine excitement. He entered the room, looking like a god of the underworld in a midnight black tuxedo, his presence filling the space with an overwhelming gravity. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes softening as they swept over her white lace. "You look incredible," he whispered, stepping toward her. He reached out to take her hands, but Amara flinched, her eyes darting to the photo hidden beneath her train. "Junhook, we have to stop this," she gasped, her voice a fractured shadow of its former strength. He paused, his brow furrowing. "Stop what? The wedding? Amara, the world is waiting downstairs. The cameras, the investors, the heirs. Everything is ready." "It wasn't an accident," she whispered, her eyes filling with a fierce, protective fire. She pulled the photo from beneath her dress and thrust it into his hands. "Look at the reflection. Look at the plate." Junhook took the photo, his face shifting from confusion to a mask of absolute, frozen rage. He didn't speak as he stared at the image, his thumb tracing the line of his own wreckage. The silence in the room became suffocating, the only sound the distant, muffled strains of the string quartet playing the dragon's theme in the ballroom below. "That car," Junhook rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves on a grave. "That car belonged to Chairman O. He's downstairs, Junhook," Amara said, her hand clutching his arm. "He's the one who is supposed to give me away. He's been sitting at your right hand for 7 years, whispering about loyalty while he watched you rebuild the very house he tried to burn down." Junhook looked up, and for a moment, Amara saw the monster she had feared. His eyes were void of light, reflecting only a cold, crystalline desire for blood. The drug Seoyun had given him hadn't broken him. It had simply cleared the way for this moment. "He wants a wedding," Junhook said, his voice dropping into a register that chilled the air. "We'll give him a wedding, but it won't be ours. It will be his funeral. Junhook, the children are there. We can't do this with Noah and Nia in the front row." "The children are already protected," he replied, turning toward the door. "Kim has them in the armored suite. They won't see a thing. But the rest of the world, They need to see what happens when you try to kill a dragon and fail to finish the job. He looked back at her, his hand reaching out to stroke her cheek. His touch was cold, but his gaze was unwavering. You wanted to be my queen, Amara. This is the price. We don't just rule this world. We purge it. Put on your veil. We're going to walk into that room and you're going to smile. You're going to look Chairman O in the eye, and you're going to thank him for his service. And then, when the toast begins, I'll show you why they call this the blood wedding. Amara looked at her reflection one last time. The white silk now looked like a shroud. The pearls looked like drops of frozen sweat. She reached down and took the beretta from her vanity drawer, sliding it into the hidden holster built into the voluminous folds of her petticoat. She adjusted her veil, the lace obscuring her eyes, and took Junhook's arm. They walked out of the suite and down the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing through the hollow grandeur of the estate. As they reached the doors of the ballroom, the music swelled, a triumphant, orchestral roar that signaled the arrival of the couple. The doors swung open, revealing a sea of 500 guests, the elite of the world's most powerful families, all standing and cheering. At the end of the aisle stood Chairman O, an elderly man with a grandfatherly smile and eyes like a serpent. He held out his hand, ready to take Amara's and lead her to the altar. Amara felt Junhook's muscles coil beside her. She felt the weight of the gun against her thigh and the weight of the photograph in her mind. As she stepped onto the white carpet, the petals of red roses beneath her feet looked like spatters of blood. She looked at the chairman, forced her lips into a perfect, porcelain smile and began to walk. The massive wedding had begun. But as the dragon's queen reached the altar and the chairman leaned in to whisper a blessing, Amara leaned in and whispered back, Asterisk. I saw the reflection in the glass. You old snake. I hope you've said your prayers. Asterisk. The chairman's smile died. In the front row, Junhook raised a glass of champagne, his eyes fixed on the man who had ordered his death. To the board, Junhook announced, his voice carrying with a terrifying clarity. And to the secrets we keep. The string quartet stopped mid-note. The doors to the ballroom slammed shut and locked from the outside. Season 2 was over. The war for the Kong Empire had just turned into a massacre. Before we jump into the next twist, I have to say a massive thank you to the Kong Empire. Your support on part 1 was incredible. If you haven't joined the family yet, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing our community grow across the globe. And if you're enjoying the drama, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Let's keep this momentum going.